Daily Show with CJ Nasello on RiverBender.com. How about that bumper music, Ray Hartmann? How are we doing?
Very good. Very fine bumper music.
Oh, man. Ray Hartmann joins us now on the phone. St. Louis Insider Substack and Donnybrook 9 PBS. A lot to talk about, the upcoming Trump indictment, and you just wrote a great piece on your Substack about the elimination of cash bail in Illinois. Ray, how are we doing this morning?
Well, thank you for that. Great. Doing great. I was really happy to see Illinois become the first state in the country that completely eliminates cash bail. It's one of the things that, for those that don't follow that issue, basically it has become in vogue really across the country for judges to prosecute, on the recommendation of prosecutors, to keep people incarcerated, keep poor people who can't afford bail, incarcerated until their trials, regardless of what they did. In many cases, simply by putting the bail at a level they know they can't afford. And so usually it's $5,000, but it's cash only, meaning you can't go to a bail bondsman and get, pay a tenth of it or whatever normally you pay. So it's so obvious. The only purpose of doing it is to keep people from, that you set it at a level poor people can't afford, and you keep them there without. And that's just, it's the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution specifically bans excessive bail. So the idea that we should be, there's two reasons to keep somebody, not to give them bail, and they're good reasons. One is if they're a risk to the community, either the community, somebody. It's a real serious crime, or somebody that's a domestic abuser that might be a threat to the person they were abusing, and two, if they're a flight risk, if they have an ability and a likelihood of not coming back to court. That's it, and those two should apply to everyone, regardless of their income.
Well, and that's been, down here in Madison County, Ray, I'm sure, as you know, we're a little bit more, red in this county than compared to the rest of Illinois. And, the argument from the majority of the Republican legislators is, well, now everyone's going to be walking, the streets after, they commit a very horrific crime. And that just, to me, is a talking point because it's right here in the language, correct?
Correct. If depending on what kind of horrific crime you're talking about, if someone's accused of murder or rape or something, it's very likely, regardless of how much money they have in the bank, if they're the kind of criminal, accused criminal who is obviously a dangerous person to the community, you do have the state does have a right to incarcerate them. They're still presumed innocent, by the way, but in extraordinary cases, sure, like that, if you think so. But just because someone gets arrested, our system is that you're innocent until proven guilty, regardless of how much money you have. And so the idea that we should just assume someone's guilty until their trial is simply is the opposite of the American system. And I will say this, I saw a statistic, more than half of American families have had a relative in their lifetime incarcerated. More than half.
Wow. Think
about it if it's one of your own family members that gets in trouble. Would you want them to sit for possibly months or even years in a jail cell before they even get a chance for a trial to determine whether they're guilty? I mean, it's just not right. I mean, if somebody is arrested, again, in the large majority of crimes that are alleged, don't involve somebody that's necessarily going to come out and do it again, particularly because you understand, if you get bail out and you commit another crime, whatever it is, I don't care whether it's shoplifting or something fairly, maybe that doesn't have a victim. The fact is, if you commit a crime and then you get out on bail and commit another one, you've got a much more serious set of charges at that point.
Well, and that's and to me, that's where I'm at with this too, because we had all these judges and all these prosecutors banding together for these appeals and filing all these injunctions. And now, to me, I can't understand why, other than just banding together and creating this campaign against it. It seems like what they were saying was already in the bill. I'm just kind of confused by that.
Well, it's nothing confusing. It's a great talking point issue. It's interesting. The Supreme Court in Illinois voted along party lines. It's 5-2 Democrats over Republicans. This shouldn't be partisan, man. I mean, again, and I use the example in the piece I wrote about police officers. Can you imagine if police officers had to just, police is, I have a lot of respect for our police overall, but everybody knows that jail is not a very safe place for a police officer, okay? Mm-hmm. Just isn't. And can you imagine if every police officer who was charged with any kind of crime, and there are a fair number that are for either on duty or off duty, whatever. Can you imagine if police officers had to sit for months in jail waiting for their trial? I mean, it would be terrible. And I'm not for that, but the same people, the Police Officers Association, all of them are saying, we need to lock them up and throw away the key here. If one of theirs is charged, not only do they expect them to be released, not with bail, with their own released on their own recognizance, but also they expect to be paid while their charges are pending. They get to put them in a desk job or something. And my point is, it's like, wait. And one of the things I meant to get into and I didn't is when you take a person, and most of the crimes that people get arrested for are not rape and murder and horrible crimes. There's just it might be drugs, it might be various things that aren't dangerous. When you take someone off the streets, and as they say, and put them in a jail cell, think about what that does. They have lives, okay? They might have a job they're going to lose because they're in jail. They might have, family that depends upon them and kids they can't see. And again, they haven't even been convicted. And I can't believe I left that out. I was going to put it, but I'm serious. They have to. It disrupts. It makes the spiral of whatever's not going on well in their lives worse. It makes it worse.
Well, it just adds to it. It's a great point. I mean, it really is, because you're right. It is, innocent until proven guilty. And some parts of this I think we're forgetting about. And now, with that being said, do you see more states adopting this, or is there going to be a fight put up on a national level?
I don't know. It's just so wrong. I mean, and again, I can't emphasize this enough. The only reason for cash bail is to disproportionately lock up poor people. I mean, $5,000. I don't know anybody who, if they had a loved one, couldn't come up with $5,000 to get them out of jail pending their trial. I mean, I'm sure there are some people, but almost any of us, almost anyone in your listening audience, most people could, if they had a loved one who, again, was going to lose their job, was going to lose contact with their family, whatever they did wrong, it couldn't scare up $5,000. But there's a whole set of people, and they happen to be disproportionately black, and they happen to be disproportionately in cities. But it doesn't even matter. It could be somebody in, there's a white people in rural Illinois or Missouri, wherever, that don't fit that stereotype. They don't have $5,000. They might not be able to get it. And it's like, that's the determining factor about whether somebody should sit in a jail cell until they're tried. And again, if they're convicted, whatever, but the fact of the matter is, this argument the police have is, well, we lock them up, and as soon as we lock them up, they're back out. If they make bail, and by the way, it's not like nobody says you can't have any bail, but you got to have some bail that's not designed specifically for poor people not to be able to make it.
Right.
Okay? If you set a regular bail of $5,000, and usually it means you have to come up with $500, most people can get that. Okay. And so it's not as if no one's advocating no bail. No one's advocating you just let them go. It's just wrong. I mean, and and again, if you try to whether you commit another crime when you're on bail or you try to skip it, you've then created a much more serious crime for yourself. So it's not like there's an incentive not to come back to trial. I mean, and statistics show that over 90% of people do show back up.
Right.
And the ones that didn't are in bigger trouble.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, that's another point to this argument is right there what you said. I mean, that's a whole nother charge and a whole nother, conversation you have to have. Now, on top of this, Ray, there's a lot of people speculating, here locally and within the state that with Governor Pritzker doing these, major, overhauls and making these, new laws, just like this elimination of cash bail and this amendment, that he's eyeing for a national election. Do you see that in his future?
I hope so. I like the guy. I think he'd be I have to tell you, I mean, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, as you know, probably. I'm certainly a liberal, maybe to the left of most Democrats, I guess. And stuff. Maybe not. I'm sort of I'm just an old liberal, but I've always been an independent because I worked for a Republican governor before everybody in your audience was born. And certainly you. I think the Democrats would be better off if someone other than Joe Biden was the nominee, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the two names that make the most sense to me are Gavin Newsom in California and J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, both of whom I think do an outstanding job of running large states. And being a governor is traditionally it can be a springboard. It certainly indicates executive experience. And we've had a tremendous number of our presidents come from that background. Not lately, but over time, certainly it's been common for governors to run after the I guess you go back to Clinton and
Bush, right?
For those on the Republican side, Ronald Reagan was governor of California. Bush was not a governor.
Oh, he was.
Oh, no, George. I'm sorry. George the younger Bush was a governor, of course. I'm sorry. What am I saying? No, I meant the first Bush wasn't. But Reagan was, and Clinton was, and George H.W.
Oh, I think Ray put me on a brief hold. Do you have me back here, Ray? Oh, I lost Ray. We're going to try to get Ray Hartmann back on the line, but you can subscribe to Ray Hartmann's Substack with St. Louis Insider. Long-time listener, first-time caller, Ray Hartmann. How are we?
Yeah, I don't know. The amateur hour. My phone decided to call Clayton High School. You told me what. It's what happens when you try to interview an old person. They're like, "What is this thing? I don't know." No, sorry about that.
You're
very
fine.
Professional. No, so anyway, I just think that either one of them would be a real interesting prospect. I'm guessing. I mean, I actually think I'm one of the people that is in the approval rating of Joe Biden. I think he's done a good job as president, but I think that this is an election that the Democrats cannot afford to lose if we're going to have a 2028 election. Okay, certainly if Trump's no, I mean it. I mean, yeah. I think that we're at a point now, and I know it sounds melodramatic or whatever it sounds like. I think it's really a referendum on whether we have a democracy or an autocracy, and the Republicans are very, very open about it, actually, and so particularly at least in Trump's case. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that literally. If one of the normal Republicans, meaning just pretty much anyone on their stage other than not named Trump or DeSantis was running, I think you could I don't mean that. In other words, if Chris Christie was president, I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but he'd be fine. I don't mean that. But if Donald Trump is elected president, I think we don't have a democracy. He's made it very clear. I mean, he talks the language of a dictator. They're very open. The New York Times had a piece recently that they're looking at ways to make all the agencies report directly to them that have had independence, such as the FTC and the FEC and the DOJ. All of them they're just become part of the president's staff, basically, and that's out there. So I don't think that he's made it clear that he's running for vengeance. So I think it's serious, and I think because of that, Democrats kind of have an obligation to win if they're running against Trump. And I'll certainly vote for Biden if he runs, and I hope he stays healthy. But you've got to be concerned about his age and health. And that's nothing new. I thought he should run as one-term. I don't know if you remember on our show, I said he should run as one-term Joe. I always originally thought that just get everybody calm down and then let the Democrats have a robust, discussion. Among themselves. I don't, so that's, I think probably the most logical replacement to him would be Gavin Newsom. I don't think I respect Kamala Harris, but I don't think she has, I think her, for whatever reason, she has not developed a base of support. I think she'd be problematic as somebody who could win.
I completely agree. And circling back to DeSantis and Trump, a new DeSantis super PAC ad came out with AI giving voice to Trump's words. You wrote about this on Raw Story. What do you make? What do you make of this? And then on top of that, what do you make of Trump's poll numbers? They keep increasing with every indictment, it seems like.
Well, as to the second question, there's no mystery. It's the Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump at this point. I mean, it's a cult. It's a cult. I mean, say that it has certainly all the features of a cult, meaning it's all about personality. I mean, the best illustration of it was in 2020 when, for the first time in history, the party didn't have a platform. I mean, it didn't need one. I mean, it's the party of Donald Trump. He doesn't have a platform. He doesn't have any particular ideas about anything. He just wants to be president, have power, and he's probably, if you're going to use superlatives about Donald Trump, it can be argued, I think, that he, without hyperbole, that he is the most effective con man in the history of the country, and two, that he is as perhaps the ultimate narcissist. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of narcissism, self-confidence, whatever you want to call it, to be president of the United States. But he's as his niece, who is a psychiatrist, likes to point out, Mary Trump, he's a sick person. He's got a level of narcissism that is, diagnosable for psychiatrists. And I mean, it's just true. I mean, he has all he exhibits all the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, and that's what we got. And so that's got nothing to do with, like I say, I'm kind of old school. I believe in liberals and conservatives. I don't think either side has all the answers. I believe in collaborate. I believe in respect across the aisle and respect across party lines. When we had the show on KKRS, I had more fun talking to conservatives than liberals. I mean, I just did. I don't like echo chambers. I'm a liberal, but like I say, I don't think liberals are right about everything. And I think, we ought to have a country like we used to, where Barry Goldwater and Hubert Humphreys could be best friends. Right. Or Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy, where we had, not just respect, but actually love among people across the aisle. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Anton Scalia, that we've lost that now. And it's all we've got now is anger and hatred and, bitterness. And, it's really, I'm not saying that's never existed in our politics. It's always has, but it's always been off on the edges, and now it's in the mainstream.
Right.
and really on both sides. I mean, maybe I'm a partisan in that sense. I think it's much worse on the right now, but in terms of being mainstreamed.
Right.
I mean, the arguments. So the answer, I think you had another question first about
the
about
AI.
his poll.
His
poll numbers. Well, the AI. Yeah, I'm just like everybody else. AI is you have to be at least concerned about the power of AI. I'm not really chicken little about it, but you've got to have a healthy skepticism that really ought to transcend any kind of differences we might have about AI and its power. I wish I could tell you I had an idea what to do about it, because I think it's got a lot of constructive benefits. But yeah, I think everybody's got to be worried. And for your listeners, that particular piece I did for Raw Story was what they did. And in this case, it wasn't all that malign. It was just interesting. They took one of Trump's posts on Truth Social, his social network, and even though he never said the words with his voice, they used his voice saying those words. They put those words in his mouth, literally, and it wasn't that good. I mean, if you knew what you were listening to, you could tell it wasn't him. To be honest, so it's not that great. On the other hand, if you were just listening casually, it sounded like his words. Now, in this particular case, they just use his voice with his words, but it's very easy, obviously, to take his voice and use words he never said.
It's true.
Well, that's where it really becomes
dangerous,
creepy. Yeah. I mean,
Well, you're absolutely right. Hey, Ray, I got to let you go, but what's a way for all of us to check out your Substack?
I wish I had a good. You go to Substack.com and search for Ray Hartmann, Ray Hartmann St. Louis Insider, and St. Louis Insider. I don't know. But go to Substack, and it's my name is with two N's on Hartmann, and it's St. Louis Insider, and I think you can find it. And I don't mind giving out my email. If anybody wants to email me when they're mad at me, it's rhartmann1952@gmail.com. So people can reach me that way. Again, with two N's on Hartmann. Awesome. And thanks for having me on, man.
All right. Thank you, Ray. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
10:37, we're coming back with Coach Greg Nasello talking about the prep season that's getting ready to be underway in a couple of weeks. We'll see how the Redbirds are doing ahead of tryouts and ahead of that fall season right after this.